It begins with a single sound, a deep metallic thud echoing inside a damp British weapons testing shed in late 1943. For a moment, there is only silence, then muffled laughter. But it isn't the light-hearted amusement of bored soldiers. It is the uneasy kind, the kind men use when they're trying to hide surprise or disbelief or the faintest hint of fear, because what those commandos just fired, what they had dragged from a crate marked captured equipment, new Georgia/British Solomon Island Protectorate, was unlike anything they had handled before. A weapon built halfway across the world by an army whose doctrine and battlefield reality were radically different from their own. A weapon whose reputation had already preceded it through frontline rumors, kicks like a mule, throws your shoulder out. Built for men who don't feel pain. It was a Japanese Type 99 rifle. And that impossible recoil the commandos joked about, they weren't exaggerating. But to understand why British Special Forces found themselves laughing in disbelief at a captured Japanese rifle, we must go back. Long before that test, long before the weapon arrived in a wet wooden crate. Because the story of the Type 99 and the men who built it begins decades earlier, in a Japan struggling to reshape its military identity. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw Japan transform from a feudal nation to an emerging industrial power. Its army, the Imperial Japanese Army, sought modernity by studying foreign rifles, foreign tactics, and foreign wars. Their first successful modern service rifle, the Type 38, was a 6.5mm weapon, accurate, reliable, and famously soft-shooting. So soft, in fact, that Western soldiers often describe firing it as gentle, especially compared to the brutal kick of rifles like the American M1903 or the British Lee Enfield. But by the 1930s, Japanese military thinkers had begun to worry. They feared their 6.5mm round lacked the stopping power and range needed against a well-equipped foe. The battles in China, especially at Shanghai and Nanjing, reinforced the belief that a more powerful cartridge was essential. So, the Imperial Army made a decision that would change everything. They would replace the 6.5mm Type 38 with a new rifle built around a larger 7.7mm cartridge. This was the birth of the Type 99. The round it fired, 7.7 by 58mm Arisaka, placed on the same power level as the .303 British and .30-06 Springfield. It hit harder, traveled faster, and punched through jungle and foliage better than its predecessor. But power comes at a cost. And for the Japanese infantryman, often smaller in build than his Western counterparts, and frequently underweight due to wartime shortages, the cost came in the form of recoil. British Commandos would feel that recoil firsthand. But before they ever laid hands on the weapon, the Type 99 had to fight its way through some of the harshest battlefields of the Second World War: Guadalcanal, New Guinea, the Solomons, Burma, places where British and Commonwealth forces learned, often the hard way, that Japanese soldiers were not defined by their equipment, but by their determination. When British troops first encountered the Type 99 in real numbers, they were often struck by its rugged construction. It was built around a strong Mauser-style action, with a receiver many experts later called one of the safest designs of the war. It had a chrome-lined bore, a remarkable luxury in the Pacific climate, and thick steel components meant to survive mud, humidity, and monsoon rains. Even late-war, last-ditch versions, stripped of refinements, still functioned reliably under conditions that would destroy lesser rifles. But the practical field reports, the kind written by men in foxholes, not engineers in factories, often noted the same 2 points. It shot straight, and it kicked brutally. Some British patrols in Burma described enemy riflemen being slow to re-aim, a detail later attributed partly to the recoil of the Type 99. Other reports mention Japanese soldiers bracing their rifles against trees, or firing in bursts of single, deliberate shots rather than rapid volleys. By mid-1943, British and Commonwealth forces had captured enough examples that ordnance units began systematic testing. These tests, conducted in India, Australia, and the UK, were detailed, methodical, and brutally honest. Weapons were cleaned, measured, weighed, then fired under controlled conditions. The goal wasn't mockery, it was understanding. Every captured weapon was a teacher. Every characteristic, a clue. And so, months later, the Type 99 that made its way to that commando testing range in Britain had already traveled thousands of miles. It had survived rainstorms, battles, shipping crates, and the curious hands of multiple ordnance inspectors. Now, under the dim glow of a winter afternoon, it was held by men who had built their reputations on using speed, surprise, and precision, commandos trained to operate behind enemy lines, in teams that relied on instinct as much as discipline. Picture them. Thick wool uniforms, sleeves rolled up, breath misting in the cold air. A few stood with notebooks, others leaned against wooden beams, studying the captured rifle like a puzzle waiting to be solved. There was no fear, only concentration. These were men trained to evaluate threats quickly and decisively. One of them stepped forward, raised the Type 99, and took a firing stance. And the moment he pulled the trigger, that moment when the rifle slammed backward with a force none of them expected, something changed in the room. They weren't just testing a piece of enemy equipment. They were encountering a physical experience Japanese soldiers live with every day. A burst of laughter broke the silence. Not ridicule, but surprise, a shared, instinctive reaction to sheer physical shock. Then came the comments. Good Lord, what were they thinking? Feels like firing a shoulder ram. Imagine using this from a foxhole. It wasn't just the recoil itself. It was the contrast. These were men familiar with the Lee. Enfield, smooth, fast, forgiving. The Type 99 felt like the opposite, a weapon from a different philosophy, a different war. But while the recoil became the memorable moment, it wasn't the whole story. The commando's job wasn't to mock the weapon. It was to understand it, and that understanding required diving deeper. Into the history, into the engineering, into the mindset of the army that built it. Japan hadn't created a hard-kicking rifle by accident. They built it because they believed their soldiers needed power above comfort, because their doctrine valued long-range performance and penetration, because supply chains made it easier to standardize ammunition with machine guns, because war pushed nations to make choices. And this was Japan's. The Type 99 that the commandos held in their hands was more than metal and wood. It was a product of a nation fighting on too many fronts, trying to develop a rifle powerful enough to compensate for logistical disadvantages, all while preparing for a long war against enemies with deeper industrial resources. The commandos didn't know all of that in the moment, but through the tests that followed, the careful measurements, the ballistic evaluations, the comparisons to known rifles, they would come to understand it piece by piece. Part 1 ends with a final image. A British commando lowering the rifle, rubbing his shoulder, shaking his head with a half-smile. Around him, the others are already discussing the next phase of testing. Accuracy, reliability, bolt strength. The laughter fades, replaced by focused curiosity, because what began as a burst of shock and humor was about to become a detailed investigation into one of Japan's most powerful infantry weapons. And the deeper they dug, the more surprising the truths would become. The next morning, the testing grounds looked different. Frost still clung to the wooden fences, but the atmosphere had shifted from amusement to determination. What happened the day before wasn't just a moment of laughter. It was an invitation to look deeper. The Type 99 demanded explanation. Why did it behave the way it did? Why did Japanese infantry accept a recoil that Western armies viewed as excessive? And what could this weapon reveal about the enemy's training strategy and battlefield mindset? The British Commandos gathered again, this time more formally. A senior ordnance officer laid out notebooks, calipers, ammunition samples, and early reports from India and Australia. The group formed a half-circle as the officer began lecturing not from theory, but from evidence, real fragments of a global war pieced together from scraps of steel and paper. The first revelation was the cartridge itself. The 7.7 by 58 millimeters round, a cartridge that put the Type 99 into the same power class as the strongest infantry rounds of the war. British records describe the recoil as prominent, unexpected for a rifle of its size, and significantly more forceful than the Lee Enfield No. 4. The commandos ran the numbers again. A 7.7 millimeters bullet traveling at speeds comparable to a .303, fired from a rifle that weighed less than many British models, produce recoil most soldiers would feel sharply. But the Japanese army had accepted that trade-off. Their doctrine placed high value on penetration, the kind needed to punch through dense jungle foliage or improvise cover. Their belief was clear. If the shot landed, it needed to count, and that mindset shaped the entire weapon. When the commandos studied the bolt, they found something that made them pause. The action, derived from earlier Arisaka designs, was exceptionally strong. Surviving test documents from British and American ordnance groups describe it as one of the strongest bolt actions of the war. Some even classified it as safer under extreme pressure than certain Western rifles. Chrome-lined bores and chambers made the Type 99 resistant to rust, a crucial advantage in tropical climates. The more the commandos examined it, the more they realized this rifle was built to survive war in the harshest environments on Earth. One commando, flipping through an Australian test report, read aloud a line that silenced the room. Despite crude late-war manufacturing, no significant failures recorded under field conditions. This surprised many of them. They had seen the rough, poorly finished last-ditch rifles captured in Burma, rifles stripped of dust covers, monopods, and sometimes even proper sights. Those late-war weapons looked unfinished, rushed, almost improvised, but their reliability? Verified, time and again. So the weapon that had produced laughed at the day before wasn't a joke. It was a result of a philosophy built around endurance, resource scarcity, and Japan's attempt to compete industrially with nations far larger than itself. Now came the practical demonstrations. The commandos set up targets at various distances. One man, broader in the shoulders than the rest, stepped forward. He raised a Type 99, braced himself, and fired. The rifle recoiled sharply, but he maintained aim. Another man took his place, slimmer, younger, and the reaction was different. He fired, then shook his arm out, trying to ease a sting in his shoulder. It became clear why some Japanese soldiers braced their rifles against trees or fired in slow, deliberate intervals. At rapid pace, the recoil compounded, making follow-up shots slower and more difficult. Yet, despite that limitation, the rifle's accuracy astonished the group. Shots at medium distance clustered tightly on the boards. "It shoots where you point it," one man muttered, almost grudgingly. The 7.7 millimeters round, heavy and stable, pushed through the cold morning air with remarkable consistency. The sights, simple, durable, designed for battlefield ranges, were easy to acquire. Then they tested the rifle's infamous accessories. First, the anti-aircraft sights. Foldable wings on the rear sight, marked for lead angles against aircraft traveling at fixed speeds. British soldiers had seen them before and dismissed them as optimistic, even unrealistic. No infantryman in a real battle could reliably hit a moving plane with a bolt-action rifle. Yet here they were, meticulously engineered, not ornamental. Why include them? Because Japanese infantry doctrine still clung to the idea that every soldier had a duty in air defense. It was symbolic of a mindset shaped by earlier conflicts, one where rifles were considered multi-purpose tools, not just infantry weapons. The commandos recorded the feature, analyzed its markings, and moved on. The second accessory drew more attention. The monopod, this metal leg, attached under the fore end, was something many British soldiers found peculiar in the field. To the commandos in the test shed, it looked almost comedic, but Australian and Indian reports indicated something the British hadn't fully appreciated. The monopod offered stability for prone shooting on uneven jungle terrain. It wasn't a gimmick. It was a lightweight compromise between a bipod and traditional prone fire. The commandos tested it, adjusting the leg and firing prone. "It works better than it should," one of them admitted. Every feature they examined seemed to tell the same story. Japan built the Type 99 not to impress Western armies, but to suit the conditions and tactics of its own vast Pacific battlefields. Yet the recoil remained the rifle's defining characteristic. This became even clearer when the team reviewed battlefield reports from the Burma campaign. Several British patrols had noted that Japanese riflemen often fired short, controlled bursts, never in rapid succession. The recoil, especially for smaller soldiers or those weakened by malnutrition, made high-rate firing impractical. In one such report, a Gurkha NCO described capturing a Type 99 and being shocked by its recoil, calling it a sharp kick that punished the arm. Commandos in the testing hut echoed that sentiment. But behind these observations lay a more profound realization. The recoil wasn't a flaw. It was evidence of a weapon built under constraints, industrial, material, and strategic. Japan lacked the industrial might of Britain, America, or the Soviet Union. Its factories were overstretched, its resources dwindling. Under those pressures, the Type 99's design aimed for durability above comfort, penetration above ease of use, longevity above finesse. The British Commandos continued their evaluation. They fired the rifle in mud. They fired it in damp conditions. They tested the bolt under stress. They cycled captured ammunition, noting its consistency and surprising quality for wartime mass production. One entry in the commando testing notes captured the sentiment clearly. Designed with crude strength, will fire when it must. The deeper the test went, the more they understood what Japanese infantry face in battle. For every hard recoil, there was a corresponding advantage. A round that punched through vegetation, a bolt that refused to fail, a barrel that resisted corrosion long after British rifles required careful cleaning. And through these tests, the commandos found themselves contemplating the psychological dimension. Warfare wasn't only about steel and wood. It was about perception. How a weapon felt in the hands of a soldier, how it shaped confidence, fear, and resolve. The Type 99 delivered a physical shock that demanded discipline. A Japanese soldier using it daily would build familiarity, even if it came at the cost of fatigue. One commando, sitting on an ammunition crate, quietly noted, "A man who fires this every day must either be stubborn or desperate." But there was another interpretation, one supported by countless Allied intelligence summaries. Japanese soldiers were trained to endure discomfort. Their standards for acceptable recoil or physical strain were stricter, their tolerance higher by necessity. Every soldier adapts to the tools he is given. The British had the Lee, Enfield, fast, smooth, forgiving. The Japanese had the Type 99, powerful, punishing, pragmatic. As the testing continued, an unexpected respect formed in the shed. The laughter had faded. Now there was analysis, reflection, and a deepening curiosity about the men who used this rifle in the jungles and ridgelines of the Pacific. One by one, the commandos took their turn behind the trigger. Each experienced the same sharp blast of backward force, but also recognized the rifle's strengths, its accuracy, its resilience, its uncompromising nature. The day's final test involved firing the Type 99 alongside other captured Japanese rifles, the older Type 38 and a late-war last-ditch Type 99. The contrast was stark. The Type 38 felt smooth, almost polite. The late-war Type 99 looked rough, but still functioned. And the standard Type 99, the rifle that had sparked this entire evaluation, remained brutally consistent. When the test concluded, the commandos gathered around a stove, warming their hands, discussing the day's results. They spoke not of ridicule, but of revelation. They had entered the test expecting flaws. They had found strengths. They had expected a crude weapon. They had found clever engineering beneath the surface. And above all, through recoil, accuracy, weight, and doctrine, they had found a window into their enemy. The Type 99 had given them more than a sore shoulder. It had offered understanding. But as the sun dipped and the shed darkened, one final question remained unresolved, a question that would form the emotional core of the next phase of their investigation. If this rifle was so powerful, so punishing, and so demanding, what did it mean for the soldiers who were forced to rely on it in the unforgiving jungles of the Pacific? That answer would come not from the test shed, but from the battlefield stories that were about to be uncovered, stories that would bring the documentary to its climax. Night had settled over the testing grounds, but inside the commando barracks, the atmosphere felt heavier than the cold outside. The laughter from the first day was now a distant echo, replaced by something far more reflective. The commandos had seen the Type 99 up close. They had felt its recoil, traced the marks of its design, and studied its brutal logic. But the rifle's true story, the part that mattered most, wasn't hidden in mechanics. It was hidden in the men who carried it. One of the senior commandos unrolled a stack of field reports from Burma, New Guinea, and the Solomons. These weren't technical evaluations. They were battlefield observations, raw, unfiltered, written under fire, reports that captured not just the weapon, but the human reality behind it. He began reading. A patrol from the Chindits had encountered a Japanese outpost in 1943. In the account, a British lieutenant described spotting a Japanese rifleman lying dead behind a log, his knuckles bruised, his shoulders swollen, the buttstock of a Type 99 jammed hard against his body. He had been firing until the last possible moment. The recoil had battered him, but he had refused to let go. Another report from the Australian 7th Division described a nighttime engagement in the rain-soaked hills of Buna. A Japanese soldier, wounded and barely able to move, continued firing slow, precise shots at long range. Each one forced his weakened frame backward. Yet he adjusted, braced again, and fired again. The Australians noted the discipline in the rifle's slow, rhythmic cadence. The man had become part of the rifle, one soldier wrote. These accounts weren't admiration. They were recognition of stamina, resolve, and the stark truth that soldiers everywhere suffer under the demands of their equipment. The commandos listened, absorbed, and began to see the Type 99 not as an oddity, but as a mirror held up to the Japanese war effort itself. It was powerful, unforgiving, resistant to the elements, and it demanded something from its user, something not every army could sustain. A younger commando spoke up quietly. So they fought through that recoil every day? The answer came from the senior officer. Yes, and when they ran out of ammunition, they used bayonets. And when they lost those, they fought with whatever was left. The room fell silent. The weight of war, real war, not the controlled environment of a test shed, pressing around them. To bridge the technical with the human, the team reviewed a final collection of records, Japanese diaries translated by Allied intelligence. Many referenced the rifle directly. One infantryman in New Guinea wrote that the 7.7 millimeters round made the rifle feel alive in the hands, but admitted the recoil left his shoulder sore after long engagements. Another, serving in Burma, noted that the weapon struck hard, but its strength brought confidence. Confidence, even at a cost. That word lingered in the room, because for all its kick, the Type 99 had given Japanese soldiers something that mattered deeply, assurance that their shot would cut through the jungle. In the chaos of close-range fighting, the first shot often decided survival. And Japanese doctrine, conditioned by years of harsh training, taught men to endure discomfort for the sake of reliability and power. The commandos now understood what their tests had only hinted at. This rifle wasn't built for comfort. It was built for survival in a theater where nothing came easily. Not food, not ammunition, not reinforcements. But there was still one last stage of their investigation, a live-fire simulation. Before dawn, the commandos returned to the test range. Fog clung low to the ground. The world reduced to silhouettes and shadows, the kind of environment where Allied patrols had often found themselves ambushed in the Pacific. Wooden targets shaped like crouching figures were set at random distances. The goal wasn't marksmanship. It was to feel the weapon under stress, under speed, as close as possible to battlefield conditions. One by one, the commandos stepped forward. They raised a Type 99, inhaled and fired. The recoil slammed back, each shot jarring the arm, slowing the rhythm. Even those with strong builds had to adjust their stance, tighten their grip, lean into the force. In rapid fire, 3, 4, 5 shots, fatigue setting quickly. The shoulder stiffened. The supporting hand ached. The rifle demanded more than the shooter expected. And suddenly, some of the battlefield reports made perfect sense. The slower Japanese firing cadence, the deliberate aim, the reliance on ambush tactics, the emphasis on the first accurate shot, the Type 99 shaped behavior. It shaped the moment-to-moment experience of the soldier holding it, and it shaped the rhythm of engagements across miles of jungle and mountain terrain. When the simulation ended, the commandos stood quietly, the rifle resting on a crate between them. They had reached the climax of their inquiry. The moment where the technical merged with the psychological, and the laughter that first day seemed almost naive. They now understood why Japanese soldiers fought the way they did, why their engagements felt different from German or Italian encounters, why their ambushes had a distinct pattern, because their weapons, including this unforgiving rifle, shaped their combat instincts. The senior commando gathered the group for a final briefing. His voice was steady, but reflective, as he summarized the weapon they had spent days evaluating. It is powerful, durable, reliable. Its recoil is severe, but its construction is excellent. It forces deliberate fire, but in skilled hands, it is accurate. And like every weapon we've captured, it tells us who we're fighting. That last sentence wasn't military science. It was truth, hard-earned in a global war where understanding the enemy often meant the difference between life and death. The commandos packed up the rifle, sealed the ammunition, and filed out of the shed. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows across the frost-coated ground. For a moment, the rifle sat alone on the table, a single artifact from a distant battlefield, thousands of miles from home. But in that silence lay a powerful realization. The Type 99 wasn't just a rifle. It was a story of an army, an island nation, and the brutal demands of a global conflict. A story forged in steel, sweat, recoil, and resolve. For the Japanese soldier in New Guinea, it was a difference between life and death. For the British Commando testing it, it was a window into the enemy's endurance. For historians today, it remains one of the clearest examples of how equipment reflects doctrine, culture, and the pressures of war. The documentary now moves to its emotional closing. As the camera pulls away from the cold British test shed and drifts across the jungles of the Pacific, the places where the Type 99 truly lived its life, the narration slows, settling into a quiet final reflection. In the end, the rifle that made British commandos laugh was a weapon that demanded respect. Respect for the craftsmanship hidden beneath its harsh recoil. Respect for the soldiers who shoulder it in battles far from home. Respect for realities of a war fought in mud, rain, and unrelenting hardship. War is not defined by one army's comfort or another's equipment. It is defined by the men who endure it, by their resilience, their fear, their determination to keep fighting even when the world collapses around them. The Type 99 reminded the commandos of truth that spans all armies, all eras. Every weapon, no matter how crude or elegant, carries the weight of the human stories behind it. And perhaps that is why the laughter faded so quickly. Because once they understood the rifle, once they understood the men who fought with it, there was nothing left to mock, only respect, and a deeper understanding of the enemy they would someday face again in the jungles of the Far East. As the final shot lingers on a rifle resting in the cold morning light, the voiceover concludes with a quiet, steady final line, a line that echoes long after the screen fades to black. History lives in the hands that held these weapons and in the lessons they left behind. The end.